It all started with a letter taped to my front door, bold red print at the top screaming "Final Notice." The HOA claimed I owed them $70,000 in fines for unauthorized landscaping, improper trash can storage, and repeated violations of aesthetic guidelines. At first, I laughed, thinking it had to be a mistake. 70 grand for some shrubs and a bin left out overnight? But the more I read, the more serious it became. They were threatening legal action. And that's when I realized they had no idea who they were dealing with. You see, when I bought my property years ago, I did more than just sign a mortgage. I purchased something most people wouldn't even think twice about: the private road leading into the neighborhood. That's right, the only access road in and out of our entire gated community. I own it. Every car, delivery truck, and even their fancy security patrol. They drive on my land every single day. I never used it for leverage before. I was just happy to live in peace and let people go about their business. But after years of silent tolerance, the HOA had finally crossed the line. It wasn't about the money, it was about control, power, and a complete lack of respect for the people they're supposed to serve. So I decided to fight back. But not in the way they expected. I didn't storm into their meetings. I didn't post angry rants online. Instead, I used something much more powerful: facts, patience, and the law. And the best part? They never saw it coming. What happened next turned the entire neighborhood upside down. Let's just say by the time they figured it out, the gates were already closed, not by them. Keep watching, because this story is just getting started too. Really understand how all this blew up, you have to know what kind of place this neighborhood is. It's one of those perfectly trimmed, postcard-looking communities where every mailbox matches. Grass height is practically regulated, and the HOA board acts more like royalty than volunteers. At first, I didn't mind. I figured if rules kept things clean and quiet, why not? But over time, it felt less like structure and more like control. And the president of the HOA, a guy named Rick, took his role way too seriously. He wasn't just enforcing rules, he was hunting for violations like it was a full-time job. It started small. Notes on my door for leaving the garage open too long. Warnings about the color of my mulch. But when they hit me with that massive fine, it wasn't just out of nowhere, it was personal. I'd spoken up during a couple of HOA meetings, asking about budget transparency and how funds were being used. Nothing dramatic, just basic questions. I could tell I'd touched a nerve. Rick didn't like being questioned. So when that $70,000 fine showed up, I knew it wasn't just about rules, it was about sending a message. What they didn't realize was that years ago, when the original developer went bankrupt mid-project, I swooped in and bought a few overlooked parcels of land. One of them happened to be the road Jep, the one leading into and out of the whole place. Most folks thought the HOA owned it, but they never did. I had the deeds, the paperwork, everything clean and legal. I never said anything because, frankly, I didn't need to. Until now, while Rick and his crew were busy flexing their power. They had no clue that the biggest move hadn't even been played yet. And when I finally made it, the reaction was priceless. After that letter, I started digging. Not just into their accusations, but into every move the HOA had made in the last few years. Turns out, they'd been fining other neighbors too, some for lawn chairs that didn't match the community aesthetic, others for putting up holiday lights 2 days early. Most folks just paid the fines or quietly adjusted. Nobody wanted to rock the boat. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. The HOA had turned into a business, and Rick was running it like a personal kingdom. My neighbor Jenna, a single mom juggling 2 jobs, told me she got hit with a $900 fine for a mailbox that was too modern. She'd cried in front of the board, hoping they'd be reasonable. They weren't. Then there was Mr. Patel, an elderly gentleman who planted a vegetable patch in his backyard. The HOA told him to tear it out, said it disrupted the visual harmony. These weren't just rules, they were power plays. I started quietly talking to neighbors, comparing notes, timelines, even old HOA meeting records, and slowly a pattern emerged. Fines were being handed out more aggressively to those who asked questions or showed any resistance. It wasn't just about paint colors or hedges, it was control disguised as community upkeep, all the while. I kept my card the road ownership close to my chest. I didn't want to tip them off just yet, but I did start documenting everything. Emails, letters, meeting minutes, even casual conversations. I knew this wasn't going to be one with anchor, needed to be airtight. Still, every day the pressure built. More notices, legal threats. The HOA even hinted at placing a lien on my home. What they didn't know was that I wasn't planning to defend, I was preparing to take back control. And the moment they pushed too far, everything would change. By week 3, the tension in the neighborhood was impossible to ignore. People weren't just frustrated anymore, they were scared. Jenna told me she was thinking about selling her house just to get away from the constant stress. Mr. Patel had stopped gardening altogether. Even neighbors who used to be die-hard rule followers started whispering about how out of hand things had gotten. Meanwhile, Rick and the HOA board kept doubling down, issuing more fines, more warnings, and acting like nothing could touch them. They walked around like they owned the place. I kept quiet, just observing, waiting. Every day, I drove down that private road I owned, watching cars come and go, knowing full well that without it, the entire community would be stuck. I'd made sure my ownership was crystal clear. I'd even had it resurveyed and re-registered. The property line ran right up to the gates. What the HOA didn't realize was that the one thing they all depended on, the road, was my leverage. Then came the final straw. I got a letter from their lawyer threatening to place a lien on my home if I didn't pay the $70,000 within 10 days. No hearing, no appeal, just a demand. They thought they had me cornered, but what they didn't know was I had already spoken to a land use attorney and everything was in place. Legal boundaries, public access laws, even a drafted notice that would make Rick and his board rethink everything they'd done. The night before the deadline, I took one last slow walk down that road. Porch lights flickered on, sprinklers buzzed in the background, and I could feel that this place wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a powder keg, and they had no idea I was holding the match. What happened next would change everything for me, for Rick, and for everyone behind those gates. The morning the deadline hit, I hand-delivered a certified letter to the HOA office. Inside was a formal notice stating that, due to ongoing harassment, legal threats, and unlawful fines, I would be temporarily closing access to the private road I owned for scheduled maintenance and inspection. Totally legal. Totally within my rights. I gave them 72 hours to make alternate arrangements. No threats, no drama, just business. I figured that would finally get their attention. And it did, just not in the way I expected. Later that afternoon, I noticed a few unfamiliar trucks parked near the entrance. Security contractors hired by the HOA were inspecting the gate area, taking measurements. And get this, laying out cones like they were planning to redirect traffic. I overheard one of them say something about installing a bypass. My first thought? There's no way they could build around the road without crossing more private lots. That's when I got curious and concerned. I pulled property records again and noticed something strange. Just a few days earlier, Rick had filed paperwork for a mysterious easement agreement with a development company I'd never heard of. At first glance, it looked like a side deal to create an emergency exit route through a neighboring vacant lot. But when I looked closer, That company's mailing address matched Rick's business, his personal side hustle. He was trying to create a backdoor deal using HOA funds to get around my road. Now, it wasn't just about the fines. It was about fraud and misuse of homeowner money. Suddenly, this was much bigger than me. Rick wasn't just trying to outmaneuver me, he was playing everyone. The whole neighborhood had unknowingly been funding his escape plan. And the worst part? That vacant lot he was trying to use. It was technically zoned for commercial use. If he pulled this off, he could build something permanent there. The kind of thing that could ruin property values for everyone. I had to act fast. But what I did next would take this battle from a private standoff to a full-blown community war. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept spinning, trying to figure out the fastest way to expose what Rick was really doing without it turning into a circus. The next morning, I printed every document I had: deed to the road, zoning laws, HOA bylaws, Rick's shady easement deal, and handed copies to a few trusted neighbors who I knew had been targeted by the HOA. We met quietly at Jenna's house and laid everything out on the kitchen table. At first, there was shock. Then came anger. Then, finally, a plan. That weekend, we called for an emergency HOA meeting. The board tried to shut it down at first, claiming it wasn't properly scheduled. But when half the neighborhood showed up, they had no choice. Rick walked in confident, trying to play it cool. He clearly didn't expect what came next. One by one, we presented the evidence. Every fine that had no proper backing. The backdoor deal with his company. The misuse of HOA funds. And then my card on the table, I revealed the road ownership and my right to restrict access. The room went silent. Rick tried to deny everything, even accused me of falsifying documents. That's when the final blow landed. Mr. Patel, who'd been quietly recording the whole meeting on his phone, stood up and played a voicemail Rick had left by mistake, where he admitted he had to find a way to shut that guy with the road up before it cost him everything. That changed everything. The board had no choice but to vote on the spot. Rick was removed as president. A full audit of HOA finances was ordered, and those outrageous fines wiped clean. But just as we all started to feel relief, one of the newer neighbors stood up and said, "Wait, if you own the road, does that mean we're all technically trespassing?" I smiled, held up the final document, and said, "Not anymore. I've just donated the easement rights back to the community." But I had to remind them who really keeps things moving. And with that, the neighborhood finally felt like a place worth living in again. After that meeting, things started to shift quietly, but powerfully. With Rick removed, the rest of the HOA board scrambled to save face, promising to operate with transparency moving forward. A few stepped down on their own, probably realizing they'd either been part of the problem or turned a blind eye for too long. The community voted in new members, people who actually lived here and cared about fairness instead of flexing authority. Jenna even ran for a seat and won. For the first time, she said she felt like she had a voice. The fines, including that ridiculous $70,000 bill, were officially cleared. They even issued a formal apology, though it came with a lot of legal fluff. Still, it meant something. Mr. Patel went back to gardening, proudly planting tomatoes and mint in full view of the sidewalk. People started waving to each other again. The tension that used to hang in the air slowly faded. As for me, I kept my promise. I transferred permanent access rights to the road over to the HOA under one condition. It had to remain a public easement, free and fair for all residents. That way, no future board could ever hold it over someone's head. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. And a reminder that sometimes doing your homework quietly beats shouting the loudest. Looking back, this wasn't just about roads or rules, it was about standing up when something's not right, even when it's inconvenient. And it showed me how one person, with the truth and a bit of patience, can change the whole tone of a community. If you're dealing with your own HOA drama, remember, never underestimate the power of what you legally own and the strength that comes from simply not backing down.